Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's BJA Adult Drug Court and Veteran Treatment Court Discretionary Grant Program Solicitation Webinar. My name is Gregory Terrain. I am the Policy Advisor for the BJA program. Also, you'll hear from Tracy Lee Williams, who is the Lead State Policy Advisor with the Drug Court program. First, before we get started, just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded. Everyone that's in attendance who has registered for today's training will get a copy of today's webinar. Also, all attendees that are on here will be muted throughout the webinar. Please use the Q&A box on the bottom part of the webinar or your screen to respond to questions, so you can begin asking questions throughout. What we'll do at the end of today's webinar, we'll read over all the different questions and we'll respond to your questions. Tracy will be, while each one of us are presenting, we'll be responding to some of your questions as you submit those as well. So for today's agenda, I'll be going over OJP, the Office of Justice Programs, as well as BJA, talking about the drug court appropriations, some of the priorities for OJP as well as BJA, going over the grant eligibility, the categories, as well as the requirements. We'll talk about the various aspects of the application. We'll go over some of the grant tips when you're applying and application resource. And then at the end, we'll go over and have a T&A or a Q&A. So what is OJP? So the Office of Justice Programs is one of three great grant-making components within the Department of Justice. The other is the Office of Violence Against Women and Office of Community-Oriented Policing and Services, we call our COPS program. So OJP is within, again, DOJ, Department of Justice. So within Office of Justice Programs, you have several or 6 bureaus as well as offices. You have, from your left, where we sit here is BJA, and then you have BJS, which is the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Their main role is working towards criminal justice-related statistics. Then you have NIJ, National Institute of Justice. Their focus is on criminal justice-related research. Then many of you all may be familiar with OJJDP, which is the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention. You may be familiar with their work around family treatment courts as well as juvenile treatment court grants. And then you have the SMART Office, which is a sexual offending, monitoring, apprehending, reporting, and tracking program. And then you got OVC, is the Office of Victims of Crimes. So those all sit within OJP. And some of you may be familiar with that if you submit grants to those organizations as well within OJP. So our mission here at BJA is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. You can find more about some of our services or about our programs or our grants via our website, Facebook, or Twitter. So I wanted to show you in terms of BJA or our appropriations for our drug court program. So this gives you kind of a snapshot over the past several years what our funding is like. I do want to make you aware of, so with the drug court discretionary grant program, it consists of 2 programs, an adult drug court program as well as a veteran treatment court grant program. For efficiency, they're combined in one discretionary grant. As you can see, also have them broken up in the level of funding or appropriations for each of those programs, and in total on your right, which is the total appropriations for the discretionary grant program. As you can see, over the years, funding continued to increase within the drug court program. It's a very solid program. It's highly supported. And that's because of not only the work we do here at BJA, but it's also some of the work or the work that you do in terms of getting awards and doing good work with your grants, as well as the many other criminal justice professionals that work with the drug court programs. So how do we use that money? So that money is used in several different ways. For us, it's used first, and we make site-based awards, which are the individual awards that you're applying for. This year, we anticipate or project making 91 awards. That number can change based off. So when applicants submit, or you submit an application, you request a certain amount of funding. Not everyone requests the maximum, which is usually $500,000 over the period of performance or over the life of the award. So last year, just to give you a sense, we projected 90 awards and we made 123. So it just depends on what applications we do receive and what level of funding they're requesting. We also use funding to support our National Drug Court Training and Technical Assistance Program. So that's a free service to our BJA grantees in terms of giving you TTA to ensure that you're successful with your awards. And then we also have the National Drug Court Resource Center, which is hosting today's webinar, and they serve as a clearinghouse for drug court resources. On that website, I highly encourage you to visit that website. I have a link later on in the slides where there's a number of different resources, documents, templates, and there's also information related to solicitations and resources that you can use when you're submitting your application. And then it also funds funding for OJHADP. So we transfer adult drug court appropriation funding to support the family and the juvenile treatment court program that is part of OJHADP. I just want to give you a sense of how do we use that $108 million. So with BJA, we have both different priorities that we focus on when we receive applications. So some of the things that we're really looking at when you submit your application, and this is key for you to make sure this information is entwined within your application and that and your program narrative or that proposal narrative that you're focusing on serving high-risk, high-need participants. You're adhering to the 10 key components as well as the best practice standards. You're providing access to MAT. And sometimes I hear certain applicants when they're putting in the application, they're indicating that we live in a very rural area. We don't currently have access to MAT. It doesn't prohibit you from obviously applying or anything, but what you may want to do when you're submitting your application, discuss what your plan is to provide access to MAT. So again, if that's not currently happening, you want to put in your application how you plan on making that happen. You want to ensure equity and inclusion. We're getting or allowing opportunity for everyone to be able to be a part of your program. We're engaging law enforcement, supporting veterans and tribal communities, and ensuring swift entry within the program, making sure that individuals who are eligible for drug court program come into the program and actually get in quicker and increasing that swiftness of that referral process. In terms of OG priority areas, many of you are familiar with submitting an application last year. This was new to the solicitation. So what we have 3 designations or priority consideration areas. So if you indicate any one of these or all of them within your application, there's extra points added to your overall score. So those 3 designations is you indicate rural communities, high poverty areas, or you indicate you're in a quality opportunity zone. So there's more information within the solicitation you can read in terms of how do you put that within your application, but want to make you aware of that. So the overall goal of the drug court program is to provide drug court and criminal justice professionals with the resources needed so that you can be successful and you can have a successful community utilizing the resources that we provide through the drug court program. So going first, so there's within this solicitation, there's 4 categories, As you can see on your right, what that looks like within what the solicitation looks like. So category 1 is the implementation of veteran treatment courts. Category 2 is veteran treatment courts, which is the enhancement of veteran treatment courts. And then you have category 3, adult drug court, which is both the implementation and the enhancement of adult drug courts. And then category 4 is statewide strategies to support both adult drug courts and veteran treatment courts. I do want to say when you're looking at the different categories, for category 3 is the only category for which you could apply to support both an adult drug court docket as well as utilize funding to support a veteran treatment court docket. But for 1, 2, it has to be specifically for a veteran treatment court. So I want to make you aware of that. Okay, and then category. So one of the things you want to make sure, so on the first page, you'll get a chance to see who is eligible for funding. So there's times where I've received applications and not since they haven't read the eligibility really clear. But this indicates who is eligible, again, state government, city townships. So make sure when you're applying or you're looking at the solicitation, you fit within one of those, your entity fit was one of those entities eligible to apply. But if you're not an entity eligible to apply and you still want to be a part of that process, one of the things you may want to do is identify an entity within your community or jurisdiction or state that may be applying. And from that, you may want to see how you can connect with them and maybe a partner or a subawardee to the grant. So if you're not one of the eligible entities, there's still an opportunity for you to apply. So, but not necessarily apply, but be a part of an application. And again, there's only one entity can apply, or fiscal agent can apply. You can have two agencies or entities doing joint applications. There's only one entity can be the applicant, and all other parties would be subawardees or a part of the application. Okay, for category 4, that is specifically for state government, state agencies that can apply within that category. So moving on, what type of courts can apply? Adult drug courts, DUI and DWI courts, co-occurring courts, veterans treatment courts. That can be a type A and type B. What type A and type B means when you're looking at the solicitation, looking to apply. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but when you're applying for funding through the Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program, we have what's called a violent offenders prohibition, which means BJA funding cannot be used to support violent offenders. But if you're applying for a veteran treatment court and you indicate you're applying under type B, that indicates that you could serve violent offenders. Type A is indicated you're not looking to serve violent offenders. Also, the other type of court can be the thriving illness and wellness courts. Mental health courts, and I just saw a question as I looked over to my right. Mental health courts wouldn't receive funding under the solicitation. This is primarily for adult drug courts, and adult drug courts would be falling under what you see, the type of courts listed here. We do, again, fund co-occurring courts, but not specifically mental health courts. Also, at the bottom, you'll see a note that if you're applying for funding, and that would most likely be within category 2, not category 3, I'm sorry, for adult drug court, and you're looking to do a combination of an adult drug court and a veteran treatment court docket. What that means is indicating that you need to identify or indicate a percentage of your budget that's going to support the adult drug court docket and a percentage of or funding that's going to support the veteran treatment court docket. Okay, application deadlines. So you want to ensure that you know what the deadlines are. This year we have 2 separate deadlines, and hopefully many of you heard already, the solicitation deadlines have been extended for 30 days. So, hey, it gives you more time to read into this and set yourself up to apply and prepare yourself to fill out the solicitation. But I want you to be aware of those dates at the bottom of your screen. Let me go back to that. I'm sorry, my screen is covered a little bit. And that information is found on the first page of the solicitation. Again, the grants.gov is March 31st, and the Just Grants is April 14th. Okay, allowable use of funds. So it's very important that you understand how you can use the funds, and that is very clear within the solicitation. When you're looking at each category, it tells you what you can use funds for. So for category 1, that's the implementation or the launch of a new veteran treatment court. So that's for courts who are looking to start a new veteran treatment court. The grant maximum of that is $500,000, and the period of performance is up to 48 months. We're looking to make 10 awards in this category. One of the things I want to make everyone aware of is for the grant maximum, again, that's the grant maximum. You can apply for less funding. You can apply for $300,000. You can apply for $250,000. It's just based on what your need is. Obviously, we want you to apply for the maximum amount of funding to support your efforts. Also, the period of performance is up to 48 months. Again, you could apply for $200,000 for 24 months. But again, it's a grant maximum as well as the period of performance. For Category 2, for Veterans Treatment Courts, that funds an established or an operational Veterans Treatment Court. Grant maximum for that is $500,000. Period of performance is 48 months, and we're looking to make 15 awards in that category. So Category 3 is both the implementation and enhancement of adult drug courts. Grant maximum is $500,000. Period of performance is 48 months, and that's what we're looking to make most of our awards. We're looking to anticipate making 55 awards in that category. And then Category 4 is the statewide strategies to support adult drug courts and VTCs. As many of you seen our solicitation last year, the grant maximum was $750,000. We increased that to $1.5 this year, so that's $1,500,000. And we're looking to make up to 11 awards, and the period of performance is 48 months. Okay, so when you're looking over the solicitation and you're trying to understand if you have the capacity to do this grant. So one of the things that I would recommend looking over the solicitation, there's going to be areas where you see challenges or gaps in how you're able to provide services with the solicitation. One of the things you want to do is maybe you want to identify community partners within your county or your jurisdiction that may also serve as a partner in this application. I believe the strongest applications I've seen over the years are the ones that have strong partnerships within the community partners. So just as a side note, in terms of when you're reading through the application and you're very strong in various certain aspects of the solicitation or the application, but there's pieces that you might be weak, again, you want to identify partners that can address maybe some of those gaps in your capacity to effectively push the grant off or move the grant or successfully operate with the funding. Okay, I wanted to go over some of the sections of the application. Where you can find a completed list would be in the appendix of the solicitation, which is the checklist. It'll tell you everything you need to go. Please keep going back in that to make sure you complete all of the required applications and documents or whatever you need to, all the attachments. So you want to make sure you go through that and make sure you check off once, twice, 3 times to make sure that you have everything you need. You can see on your left is all of the documents that make up the application. Okay. So what we have here is what's called the basic minimum requirements. So every solicitation that we have at BJA has critical elements that need to be within your application. For this solicitation, the critical elements are the abstract, the narrative, the time and task plan, and the budget detail worksheet. So what happens is when you submit your application, these are the required documents. They go through initial screening process, which we call BMR, or basic minimum requirements. And we see if these things are in there, then that application moves forward to peer review. If these documents are not in your application, then your application doesn't move any further than that process. One of the things I want to make you all aware of, which I see sometimes, is that when people are uploading their attachments or documents to the application, they sometimes submit blank documents. I've seen an abstract or a narrative uploaded, and when I go in to click on it, it's a blank document. What I would recommend that you do that may be helpful is that when you're uploading or you're working on your various documents and you have maybe a folder for that electronically, to make sure that you create maybe a separate folder and indicate final on that document, just so that you know that you're submitting or uploading a final document. Because a lot of times, and I know a lot of you guys, when you're writing this application, you may have a team of writers, or you may be working with a group of people who you all are making sure you get the application, and sometimes things may slip up. Just want to make sure that when you're sending the final document that you make sure you look over it and have these documents. Again, these are required in order for your document or your application to move to the next phase. Okay. Within the proposal abstract, these are things that you're required to respond to. Obviously, you want to indicate what category you're applying to, if you're pre or post adjudication, the type of court, jurisdiction, point of contact, the amount that you're requesting. Again, make sure what your requesting amount does not exceed the amount. It's pretty clear when you look at the different categories that there's a maximum amount. Do not exceed that. Then also make sure that when you're indicating that on the abstract, that the $500,000 you indicate on the abstract is what you also indicate on the 424, which is also the same amount you indicate in the budget detail worksheet. Also, the participants proposed the capacity. If your current capacity is 20 and you're looking to expand that or increase it to 40, you indicate that. The target population, what are some of the key components that you're looking to meet within the application, and then your data collection mechanisms. Again, the abstract could be no more than 400 words. If you are looking to add any additional words, you would need to do an attachment and provide more of information in your abstract on an attachment. We want to keep the current abstract to 400 words. Okay, the proposal narrative. So it's important to look over the instructions. So when you're doing a proposal narrative, it needs to be double-spaced, standard 12-point font. We prefer Times Roman. 1-inch margins should not exceed 20 pages, and the number of pages should be 1 of 20. So when you're doing each page, 1 of 1, 1 of 2, 1 of 3, 1 of 4, and so on. So also, as a helpful hint, a table can be a single space, and it can be also included as an attachment. Okay. For the proposal narrative, this is, I guess I say it all the time, this is important. But one of the things that is important when you're looking over your narrative, each component or section of the narrative has weighted scores too. So you can see the description of the issue is 20% of your overall score. Project design is 40% and on down. A good thing to do is when you're writing your application, you want to put more attention on the section that has the most points, which would be the project design and implementation. But this gives you a sense of, which one is which section is how many points it is for each section. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. You'll also see in here, my screen is kind of blocked, but we also have, I think it's 5% of the scores for your budget. Although it's 5% of the overall score, one of the things sometimes peer reviewers do is look directly at your budget to make sure that what you indicated in your budget reflects what you're actually asking for in your grant. If you're asking for one thing, if your budget shows that you're asking to do one thing, and then you look at your narrative and it says completely something else, that would be somewhat of an issue with your application, although the budget is 5% of the overall score. So I want to make you aware of that. Okay, and the proposal narrative, I did want to just give you a little insight. I know sometimes we have these webinars. A lot of questions are what are in some of those areas, and this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but for the description of the issue, you're really describing the nature and scope of your problem in your jurisdiction. It also explains your current court's response to the problem and describes the target population which you're looking to serve. For the project design, that's more focusing on demonstrating the eligibility of your drug court and the eligibility of those who you're determined to come into it. One of the things you also want to be aware of when you're in this section is that when it comes to eligibility, you want to make sure that you have a validated risk assessment tool that you're utilizing. So you would indicate that in that section. Demonstrate access to MAT. Again, I talked about that a little earlier. if you currently don't have access, but in this section, you want to talk about how you're looking to obtain access. And in this area, you also describing your plan to address the opioid stimulant and substance abuse issue in your jurisdiction. Also, for capabilities and competencies, indicate whether the current team has received training, who are the key members in your drug court or better treatment court, and what are their roles, and identifying the treatment providers or other partners that would be a part of your application or a part of your drug court program. And then the last is the planning to collect data related to performance measures. You want to describe your court's current ability to collect and analyze data. The other required document is the time and task plan. So I provided an example to the right of what one would look like. I get a lot of questions about we don't have a template. BJA doesn't have a template, but I showed you a sample on your right. But what your time and task plan needs to have is what's listed on the left. Your goals and objectives, summarizing the activities with dates of completion and who would be responsible for that, and to indicate the number of program participants that you were looking to serve. So that would be what your time and task plan would need, and that would be also, and then it can also be an attachment to your program narrative. Okay, draft your budget early. Also make sure you read carefully. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. When you're doing your budget, you want to make sure that you're requesting to use funds for allowable use of funds, and that you're not exceeding the amount that, or requesting the amount that exceeds what you can actually ask for. So you're staying within the maximum of $500,000. Okay, the budget, and I'm probably kind of repeating some of what I said a little bit earlier. So the budget narrative should be directly related to the project design. There should be no expenses in the budget that aren't referenced in your project narrative. Personnel costs should be related to key personnel for the project. Recipients should be categorized as either sub-awards or procurement contracts, and also clearly be stated in the project narrative. The budget should include adequate funding for the project, but no more than the solicitation indicates, which you would stay within that $500,000 for categories 1, 2, and 3, and at 1.5 for category 4. And the last bullet talked about what I mentioned earlier, that the amount requested should be reflected in the 424, the budget narrative, as well as in the abstract. What does the budget look like? It should be itemized budget for each grant year or each year of your grant. 25% match is required. There is no minimum required amount of cash match. Do not report a overmatch in your budget. Applicants should budget to have up to 3 team members attend up to 2 conferences, and you would need prior approval and planning and reporting in terms of going to conference, meeting, or trainings. Okay. Also, when you're submitting an application, don't forget about the additional attachments. So you'll see a section in the solicitation that says additional attachments. Make sure you, like I mentioned earlier, triple check, go through, look at the checklist and the appendix, make sure you address all the required and or recommended attachments that are a part of the entire application. Those are the ones listed in front of you. I won't go over all of them, but you also see the OJP priority areas indicated as an attachment for rural communities, high poverty areas, as well as quality opportunity zones. So that's where you would respond to that information, and you would include that also as an attachment. Okay, some of the grant requirements. So I want to make everyone aware, and most of you may already know if you've been receiving BJA funding over the past 4 to 5 years, is that our the drug court program falls under the CARE Act, which has a focus on opioids. So when you're completing your application in the project narrative, all applicants are required to describe their plan to serve offenders with substance addictions, and focusing on the reduction of opioid stimulants. So that's that needs to be a part of your proposal narrative, that you address that. The other requirement is a medication-assisted treatment. The applicant must demonstrate that their drug court, which funds are being sought, will not deny eligible clients access to the program because of their use of FDA-approved treatment for substance abuse. And there's a link below here where you want to find more about BJA's provisions related to MAT. Also, another grant requirement is medical marijuana. So award recipients are prohibited for using federal funds to support programs or activities that violate the Controlled Substance Act. BJA funds must ensure that drug court participants are tested periodically for the use of controlled substances, including medical marijuana. This came up in last year's solicitation. I was getting a lot of questions about this. So this is also part of the grant requirement. We just kind of cleared up the language a little bit. That's also a grant requirement. And then the last grant requirement, I believe, is the violent offender prohibition, which I mentioned earlier. And again, this, so I'll kind of read through this. So BJA funds are used and may not be used to serve violent offenders. But what we do include in here that grantees that decide to use both BJA grant funds and other funds that are not BJA must be able to, if they're going to serve violent offenders, must be able to track these expenses to ensure that there's a separation of funds, and they must maintain documentation they can show to an auditor if necessary. So if you're using BJA funds for an adult drug court that is aligned with the violent offender prohibition, you can't serve violent offenders. But if you've received funding somewhere else and you're able to demonstrate that if you're serving violent offenders, that you're able to show that you're not using BJA federal funds. And this also includes match funds contributed by the grantee or by you if you receive the award. Again, this doesn't pertain to violent offenders if you're applying under Type B. And then next, I'll pass this over to Tracy. Tracy Lee Williams. She'll go over some of your tips when you're applying for award. I'll turn over to you, Tracy.
Okay, thanks, Greg. My name is Tracy Lee Williams, and I'm a state policy advisor. I work in the programs office, and I am a member of the drug court team. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple of tips, and if you follow them, which I strongly suggest you do, this will help your program or your application to go through the approval process more expeditiously. Okay, so these are some common mistakes that we've seen over the past couple of years. All right, we have a new system. All right, the previous system was the grant management system, which is no longer being used. The new system is the Just Grant system, and you really need to go and carefully read the how to apply instructions that are linked to the solicitation. Okay, this is a new system, it's new to us as well, so this is a journey that we're all taking together. So give yourself plenty of time to complete the Just Grants and grants.gov submission by that due dates. And submit, which is the application for federal assistance. Okay, also, all these need to be combined, or they need to attach to one another. The DUNS number, which is your Data Universal Numbering System number, as well as SAM. SAM is the System for Award Management. All right, it's imperative that you make sure that you have the correct DUNS number entered on your SF424 and that is registered in SAM, sam.gov. Okay, because everything that you need is attached to your DUNS number, and the Just Grant system extracts that information and puts it into your official award file. Okay, the specific agency needs to be registered under the DUNS in SAM, okay, and will be submitted, you will be responsible for submitting the full application in Just Grants and administering the award if it's funded. All right, The SF424, and as Greg mentioned earlier, the federal request amount that you enter on your SF424 should match the federal request in your application budget for the entire grant period. Next, the budget and allowable costs, as Greg mentioned earlier, do not include any prohibited costs listed on page 12 of the solicitation. And I'll just give you a tidbit. We do not fund incentives. So say for instance, you all wanted to give a gift card as an incentive to a participant. We do not fund incentives or food or beverages. Okay, in your budget, you need to make sure that you're clear with the difference between subawards versus procurement contracts. So there is a link in the solicitation that will take you to some information on how to distinguish whether or not you are going into a subaward relationship or a proposed procurement contract relationship. The resources that are linked to ensure that you properly categorize your costs in these sections. And as I just mentioned, it'll give you, there's a checklist that's involved that you can go through and ensure that you are indeed going into a subaward relationship as opposed to a contract. All right, so we want to make sure that you distinguish that, or your funds will be held until you provide that information to us. All right, as Greg mentioned, was the match 25% match. It's important that you just stick to the 25%. Of course, you can't go lower, but if you go higher than the 25%, you will be held liable for those funds. So I strongly suggest that you do not, that you go with the 25%, and whatever you want to put towards it, of course, that's your option. All right, application attachments. Now, the application attachments are very crucial that you attach that information to your application. All right, the application and submission section begins on page 13 and is helpful for us when you upload each required attachment. It's in a separate file and is named and numbered to match solicitation. And if you combine the files, which I really recommend that you don't, please make sure that you include that in your table of contents. It may be easier to put them all together, but at the on the inside, right, on the back end rather, it's going to be harder for us to identify that information. And if there needs to be any changes, then we would have to return the whole file to you to make corrections to one item. So it's important that you go ahead and make them separate attachments. Okay, now these are also application attachments. We have the disclosure of pending application. This is required for all OJP applicants. Then we have the fiscal agent MOU, which is required if the city or a county is applying for the funds on behalf of the court. So if say for instance, if the city that the court is in is attached to the DUNS number, then they would be the ones that would be applying for the funds on behalf of the court. And they would be the ones that would actually draw the money down, and you would submit your invoices or time cards or whatever the case may be to pay those obligations. You have the research and evaluation independence and integrity attachment, which is required if you're proposing to use federal funds to pay an outside evaluator, which is really important that you have that attached, or your funds will be held until you submit that information to us. And as Greg has stated, the time task plan must indicate the number of participants to be served quarterly to demonstrate how the total number of anticipated participants will be served before the end of the grant project. At the end of your solicitation, which is just a handy note for you all to help you pin down your application where you meet all the requirements, there is a checklist at the end of solicitation. And you can just go down and make sure that you have addressed each of those required attachments, or your funds will be held until you fix it. And with that, I'm handing it back over to Greg.
All right, thanks, Tracy. Let's see, so one of the things I mentioned earlier is the National Drug Court Resource Center. Here is a link to that website and all the different resources that they provide. I mean, this is just a super duper snapshot, but this is related to grant solicitation resources where you can find the best practice standards, both volume 1 and 2, 10 key components, 4 veteran treatment courts, tribal illness wellness courts. We also have examples of previous success awards on the grant solicitation research page of NDCRC. And again, there's a cornucopia of resources that you could look through on that website. There's maps, a lot of different resources. So I highly recommend you go to the website and look at the various resources and podcasts, blogs, and newsletters, and definitely visit the website. Okay, I think I'm trying to advance the slides. Okay. Some of the previous held webinars for today, we really wanted to focus on this solicitation. I know we get a lot of questions regarding our new Just Grants system, as well as our ASAP system. So I wanted to show you different webinars that were held over the past month or so that you can get more information. We did a lot of webinars on Just Grants. So you can visit so you go in and Google BJA webinars. It'll take you to this page where you'll get a chance to see the various different webinars that were done prior to this one. One on the funding process, talking about what are some of the first steps. So this would be a good time to check that webinar out. Also the Just Grants webinar, you can check out there. Also the grant writing workshop webinar is also listed where you could view that as well. So I just wanted to put these up. Again, you guys will get a copy of this webinar, but I want to just provide you with some information related to other webinars that you can navigate through that may have other information that, if not answered today, that you can also visit those websites too. Not websites, but webinar links. Next slide. Okay. I did want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I did want to give you the information to Just Grants technical support website. So here is their email address and the contact number and the times you can contact them. So if you have any questions, and this information is also listed, I think, on the second page of the solicitation. But if you're having challenges, definitely reach out to them related to your Just Grants technical issues when you're trying to submit your application. We can go to the next slide. Okay. Also, the response center. This is also if you're having technical issues with submitting your grant. Here is the email, the phone number, and the office hours for the response center. I wanted to also provide that resource for you guys. And then now I'll turn it over to Christina, who will talk about the Tribal Illness Wellness Inaugural Survey.
Thanks so much, Greg. We wanted to let everybody know that the National Drug Court Resource Center with BJA will be conducting the first Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts survey. We are very excited to be able to put this survey out coming up on February 10th. The goal, as it says here, is really to understand Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts, how they're structured, how they operate, et cetera. And in appreciation for your time and efforts, we will provide a copy of the report as well as a summary report of your Tribal Healing to Wellness Court information, along with a lot of other data that's listed here. So this is similar to the Painting the Current Picture survey that some of you may have participated in across the states and territories, and we're very excited to have the very first survey of Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts. As I said, we'll be doing the survey will be going out on Wednesday, February 10th via email, and we'll also be having a Q&A webinar on Wednesday, February 24th to answer all of your questions about the survey and about the larger project. So we really hope that we hear from you and that you'll be able to participate in this first ever survey of the nation. Thank you, Greg.
All right, thanks, Christina. As we'll go to the next slide, I think that's where we go into our Q&A. I keep saying T&A.
Great. Thank you. We have a number of questions that have come in over the last 35 minutes or so. The first question, Greg, is if a statewide application for Category 4 is not seeking to expand the launch of a new local implementation plan, must the statewide applicant identify each drug court team member and describe their role, responsibilities, and qualifications?
Okay, that's a pretty long question. I'm sorry, can you
Sure.
repeat it again?
It's a statewide application, so Category 4. They're not seeking to expand the launch of new local implementation plans. So must they describe the statewide drug court team member and describe their roles, responsibilities, and qualifications in that capabilities and competencies section?
Well, they would just need to indicate who would be working on the grant, or the capabilities of the coordinator, or who would be facilitating that award.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
The next question, does the Veterans Court need to be a standalone program, or can the Veterans Court be a track within an adult drug court program?
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned earlier, you have the 4 different categories. For Category 3 is the one category where you can apply for both adult drug court implementation or enhancement, as well as a veteran treatment court track in that category. That's the only category that you could apply for 2 separate tracks and include a veteran treatment track. Also remember that when you're doing a veteran treatment court track or veteran treatment court along with an adult drug court, you also have to indicate the percentage of funding that you're looking to support for adult drug court and a veteran treatment court. So if you have a much larger veteran treatment court track, you may be requesting that 70% of funding go towards that in your application and 30% goes toward the adult drug court.
Okay, great. Can funding through this solicitation be used to fund a family treatment court?
No, this is, if you've seen it within the solicitation, there are type of courts that can apply. Family treatment courts aren't funded through BJA's Adult Drug Court Discretionary Grant Program. That would be through OJJDP through their family treatment drug court solicitation.
Great. What source do you use to define an area as a high poverty area?
So in the solicitation, it would tell you, so you're using census data and information there. So when you go through solicitation and you're looking at how you respond to that question, it gives you step-by-step process on how to respond to that section of the solicitation or in your application. But it's primarily looking at census data that you would see for your jurisdiction.
Great. This is a question about the eligibility criteria for the solicitation, where it says on behalf of a single drug court or veterans treatment court. Does this mean only one application per applicant, or could we apply for more than one specialized court project as long as we keep it to one specialized court application?
Correct, you're right. You can apply for one county or jurisdiction or court as long as they are an eligible entity can apply for more than one award. They can apply for a veteran treatment court. They can apply also for funding for a adult drug court. They may also want to apply another award application for a DWI or DUI court. So you can apply for as many applications, again, as long as it's not the same. You're not sending 2 applications for the exact same thing. It has to be a different target population or a different type of court that you're applying for.
Okay. Does the grant consider security deposits for sober living transitional housing as an allowable expenditure?
Does the grant allow, I'm sorry.
Does the grant allow for security deposits for sober living transitional housing as an allowable expense?
Yes, it is. When you look at the solicitation, there's a section within the solicitation that talks about recovery support services. And there is a certain amount allowable for services, transitional housing, and deposits.
Can indirect costs be included as match?
I'll turn it over to Tracy as more of a, Tracy, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, Greg. No, you can't apply indirect costs towards your match. Indirect costs, of course, would be between you and the cognizant agency that you have the approved negotiated indirect cost agreement with. So no.
Okay. Let's see. So this is regarding the violent offender blurb. As the applicant, this is a state court, we do not provide services directly to adult drug court clients. Services are provided by service providers. Must our state track expenses incurred by service providers for violent offenders?
If you're receiving BJA funding and it's identified that the funding is being used to support or support someone who's a violent offender, then that would be in violation of the violent offender prohibition.
Okay. Do attachments to the narrative count against the 20 pages?
No. Nope, you can include as many attachments as you want. The narrative has to stay within 20 pages.
How many applications are typical for category 3?
Typically, well, so what we anticipate, I was going over the different categories. I can't remember the numbers exactly off the top of my head. I think for category 1, I think we said we anticipate maybe 10 awards. For category 2 for veterans enhancement, I think we anticipate maybe about 11 awards. For category 3 adult drug courts, we anticipate around 55. And category 4, I think we indicated about 11. So that's pretty much typically when I look over maybe the last 10 years and look to see where we get most of our applications, it has been in category 3 for adult drug courts, the implementation as well as enhancement. So, if we receive 300 applications, primarily 50 to 60% of those are going to be within that category.
Okay. All right. So this is a clarifying question. On page 7, it states eligible drug court types are co-occurring courts. The same section states combined drug court types with other dockets are eligible. However, I understood you to say mental health courts cannot submit for participants with substance abuse and mental health diagnoses. Can you confirm?
No, so mental health courts aren't eligible under the solicitation. Co-occurring courts are, which means you would have both a substance abuse and a mental health diagnosis. Those would be a co-occurring court, and those would be a court that could be funded under here, but just a straight mental health court aren't funded under this solicitation.
Is there a limit to the number of letters of support that can be attached?
No, I mean, if you want to submit 100 of them, you could do that, but no, there's no limit on the amount of. I mean, I'd rather you not because I have to look through all of them, but you can. No, there's no limit on the amount of letters.
Okay. How can we get the Excel budget provided in the grant unprotected? We have applied for grants in the past, and when modifications are required, the Excel sheet is protected.
I'm not familiar with that. I don't, Tracy, you familiar with the unprotected? That might be a question I might have to follow back up with that person if they maybe sent me an email. I'm not familiar with it being protected, that they aren't able to get into the budget form. If they can follow back, they can follow up with me and email me, and I can look into that further for them. That might be a case-by-case scenario.
Okay. Is there a data collection method that is recommended?
No, we don't necessarily indicate what your data collection method would be. You know, obviously within the solicitation, we require that you have one in place. but there's not one that I would recommend, and I wouldn't want to necessarily recommend one coming from a federal agency.
Okay. Has the current administration lifted the moratorium on training related to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So if you were able to have opportunity to look at some of the executive orders passed by the current administration, you'll see there's been some related to equity and inclusion. So I would say that there has been and there's continued to be a move in that direction if you just were able to look at what some of the executive orders that were coming out from this administration.
This is a budget question. Do we need to submit a full budget of the whole program specifying the grant funds requested and match funds and where the match funds come from? Or do we only submit the budget for the proposed changes to the program?
For the entire program, you would submit a budget for the entire program.
For the entire program, you would submit a budget.
I'll bring Tracy in here. Might want to add something.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the question was.
I'm sorry.
I think
you
it's
guys are
because
breaking
Greg's
up.
not on mute.
Oh, okay.
And Tracy's is on. Do you need to submit a budget for the whole program or just for the enhancement pieces that you're requesting funding for?
No, it has to be for the whole program. As Greg stated, it's the 3-year budget, then you have the summary. So that has to summarize and pull all the money together, showing how the funds will be spent.
Okay. Tracy, I think this is another question for you. Now that applicants have to submit the budget amount in grants.gov, and then that populates the Just Grants system, can the budget amount noted on the SF424 be adjusted after it's submitted once folks have submitted or when they're submitting the application in Just Grants?
Not by the grantee. Whatever amount that you approved for, which will come from our policy office, and it would be per a funding approval document that would be signed off on by the principal assistant attorney general. And it comes down through us once they've gone over all the different components that Greg went through. If they should decide to decrease it or maybe even increase it if it's less than the 500,000, that would come from us. Okay.
So once in grants.gov, that first step of the grant process, they put in the amount that they're requesting, that cannot be modified prior to submitting the proposal in Just Grants. Is that right?
This is Greg. I think what Tracy was talking about also was related to the, I think with the Just Grants process, if they're putting a budget, I believe, again, I don't know the Just Grant system that well all the way, but I do remember being in a webinar with them, and they indicated that you can make changes to your budget if it's in the earlier stages with Just Grants. If it's in the part of the application process, you can make changes to your budget if it's with Just Grants. But what Tracy was indicating, once it comes to us and you submit your application and you indicate the amount, then it has to go through a process for you to make an adjustment to that amount or to your budget.
Okay. If there are violent offenders with a substance use disorder, we still use these funds under Type B. Is that correct?
If you are a veteran treatment court. So if you apply as a veteran treatment court under Type B, which allows for violent offenders, then you can serve violent offenders only with veteran treatment court, and you indicate a Type B as a Type B applicant. Anything outside of that, you can't use BJA funds to support violent offenders.
If a risk needs tool is funded by this grant and given to those at the time of arrest, some may be arrested as a violent offender, but later the charges may be reduced. Is this allowed?
So the language is if they're charged with a violent offense, then they would be prohibited from be it in the program, but I understand the question. It sounds like if they haven't been necessarily convicted, but the language still indicates being charged with a violent offense, that would prohibit them.
Okay. If a veteran has a medical marijuana card and wants to participate in the program and needs to use grant funds for substance abuse counseling, would they be allowed in the program and to utilize BJA funding?
So no, it was one of the grant requirements that I indicated has to do with medical marijuana, and a drug court program would have to do drug testing, and medical marijuana federally is an illegal drug, so that they wouldn't be able to receive services if it was being funded by BJA for medical marijuana.
Can a court apply directly for a BJA grant, or do we need to go through the county? We are a district court with a current adult hybrid treatment court program.
Nope, courts can apply directly as long as the court is identified as an eligible entity, which is on the first page of the solicitation. If the court is an eligible entity, then they would be able to apply.
Okay. And can you clarify what information is submitted in grants.gov and what is submitted in Just Grants?
In grants.gov, so Just Grants is more of a BJA program. So Just Grants, so grant.gov, if they submitted an application in the past or haven't, that's more the general federal location where you would submit an application. And then the Just Grants is the new system here at BJA. That means that is the process by which those grants then come in from grants.gov to Just Grants, which is within BJA.
Okay. Can category 3 be used for enhancing an existing drug court to expand to diversion and begin a small veterans court, all within the same judicial district and same district court judge responsible to all specialty courts?
I think I understand the question. So category 3, I think I mentioned earlier that if you're applying on category 3, you could request funding to support both an adult drug court and a veteran treatment court docket, as well as so within category 3, that includes both implementation and enhancement. So if you were looking to do enhance or launch a new adult drug court and a new VTC docket, you would be able to apply within that category. I hope I'm answering that right. Answering that question.
Can you clarify what you meant about a CARA application and what that may be helpful for?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It might have been kind of a little bit confusing. So what I was indicating that BJA, the drug court program, along with our COSAP programs, some other, are funded through CARA, through AirCAC funding, which just means that when you're applying, that you definitely need to make sure that you're indicating in your application and a project narrative that you're focusing on opioid, stimulant, and substance abuse. So because that funding is tied to opioids and stimulants, and we need to make sure you indicate that you have a plan to address that. So I was referring to that just so people can make the connection between that this is funded with CARE Act funding and understanding what the purpose of CARE is. You'll see that there definitely needs to be a plan to address substance abuse and focus on opioids and stimulants in the solicitation.
With regard to the disclosure of pending applications document, is this for any federal funding or just funding for this project?
That's for, I know at BJA, that's for many of our solicitations. You have to do the disclosure.
Are transportation services for adult drug court clients regarded as a recovery support service?
I have to look back. I believe so. Yes, if they're trying to, if it's related to connecting with the services to ensure they can remain sober or sobriety, In your application, you definitely want to make a link to the goals and objectives of that services, and that would also be an allowable use of funds within the solicitation. Obviously, you will want to work with your state policy advisors once you receive the award and make sure that we're budgeting the right percentage of funding that would support what you're trying to do within your with your grant.
Okay. So this question is regarding, there's a 501c3 Veterans Treatment Court Support Organization that solicits and provides funding to veterans in a VTC. Are we eligible to apply for grant funding? And this funding would be for clothing, meals, rent, job assistance, transportation, housing, etc.
Yeah, that to me, it's a 503c, that wouldn't be one of the listed eligible entities that would be able to apply. Now, what they can do is if there is a eligible entity, which is listed on the front page of the solicitation, that is applying in their jurisdiction, they may want to connect with that entity to see how they may be able to serve as a resource or a part of that application with that entity that would be eligible to apply.
Okay. Is there a comprehensive list of services that are considered wraparound or recovery support services that are allowed?
I don't think we have a particular list that we could provide. So there's no particular list that I have that I could target them to that would speak to the various, services that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between drug court and a tribal healing to wellness court?
In terms of funding, no, you could apply for both. They're both type of courts that can apply for funding. In terms of them being different, yes, they're definitely different in the type of courts and how they operate, and have even 10 key components that focus on tribal healing and wellness courts, as well as for veteran treatment courts. So there is a big difference in how they operate, but they're both considered type of courts that could receive funding through this solicitation. And we welcome tribal healing and wellness applicants to apply. Highly encourage.
Right. Would an application for Category 4 that focuses on data collection and training and technical assistance services require submission of participant data in the PMT?
So if the program is not collecting data directly, if it's not directly serving participants, then there wouldn't be any client level data to collect. As long as that's clear in their project narrative or proposal narrative that they're doing data collection and TTA, then that wouldn't be a part of their performance. That wouldn't be something they would even be able to report out on.
Okay.
But that also needs to be, obviously clear in the proposal so that when you have a peer reviewer or reading your application, they're not looking for something that, wouldn't necessarily be in there, because your focus wouldn't be working directly with clients or participants.
Okay. Can a state apply for more than one Category 4 grant, or will they compete against each other?
No, they can apply. We've had that in the past where states receive two different statewide awards. They might receive one for veteran treatment courts, one for adult drug courts, or they apply for maybe two adult drug courts, maybe not the same year, but applied. But one was focused on data collection, and one was expanding drug courts in several regions of the state that might have been rural. So again, they can submit applications, but you obviously can't submit two of the same type of application. And you can apply for applications. A state can want to serve region 1, which is what they would just make an example, Region 1 of the state, and then another application could be also focusing on the drug court, but it's focusing on Region 3. So it just, as long as their applications show some difference to them, serving different populations or court types, then they would be able to make 2, 3, 4 applications. What I will mention, though, one of the things that we also look at when we're reviewing applications, we're also looking at where we're making our awards. So and also focusing on areas where, or looking at areas where we don't currently have our resources or where we're not currently funding, but we've made 2 or maybe 3 awards to one state in that category in the past.
Great. This is around conference approval. Do you have any guidance about getting prior approval to apply for conference funding? How do we secure that approval? It looks like
so
this.
once you receive an award, then one of the things that you would do, you will work with your state policy advisor in terms of what that would look like in terms of the approval for whether it's conferences or trainings. That would have to go through that approval process. So that's one of the things, once you receive an award, then you would be working with your designated state policy advisor who would assist you with that process.
Okay.
But I don't know, I'll ask, see if Tracy wanted to add something to that, or maybe I might have missed something with that. So.
No, Greg, usually grantees don't sponsor conferences or trainings. It may be on the state level, but the only thing that we pay for actually would just be, lodging or travel costs. But there is a process that you would have to go through if you are sponsoring a conference. And like Greg said, you would work with your assigned state policy advisor on that, because that's not something that is automatic. There is a procedure that may take a little time in order for it to be approved, because it goes through several tiers of approval.
And yeah, just to kind of piggyback what Tracy was saying too, is that, for usually that would be something more maybe what a state applicant would apply for to do a statewide conference. And it may be more of that than it will be an individual drug court doing a conference.
It was stated that the grant does not fund incentives. Does this also apply to incentives for data collection?
Yes, it would apply to data collection as well. That's an unallowable use of funds as for incentives.
Okay. This particular program is looking for funding for an adult drug court and a veterans treatment court. So does the VTC, can they apply under category 1 or category 3 for the adult drug court? They can submit 2 applications. Is that correct?
They can submit 2 applications, or they can submit that 1 application in category 3. But yeah, they can do either. Obviously, the difference between doing one or the other, if you apply for 2 separate awards, obviously you can request the grant maximum. So you have 2 awards, $500,000 over 48 months. But also entailed with that is 2 grants. You have to report on 2 grants. Whereas if you apply for under category 3, you're just doing 1 reporting, and it's 1 grant, but it's also less amount. And so.
If a state submits an application for category 4, would that compete with local, county, city applications for other categories within the state?
No, that wouldn't compete, no.
Okay. This might be a Tracy question. If you're supporting a position through a state grant that is ending, can you apply with BJA money to continue that position?
Yes, if they are working directly on the program, as well as if they are percentage paid, you can use BJ funds to pay their salary. So it can be the 100% of their salary, or it could be a portion, a percentage of it, if you, that will be dedicated solely to the program.
Okay. Are substance use, abuse, and mental health assessments considered direct costs? What about the recommended services?
Those would be allowable use of funds if you were doing those assessments or purchasing those tools. That would be allowable use of funds.
Okay. This is a category 4 question. Can you clarify the requirement mentioned in which drug courts need to be using a validated risk assessment tool? Specifically, if some courts are using, but not all, and an applicant would like to use funding to implement a validated risk need assessment tool statewide, would that meet the eligibility requirements?
Yes, so it's one of the things I mentioned, we highly recommend it. You wouldn't receive an award if you weren't using a validated risk assessment tool, but we highly recommend you do, because that's the most successful way to identify the risk and needs of program participants. So I don't know if I answered that. Can you repeat the question again? I think I answered, but I just want to make sure.
Oh, sorry, let me find it.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So can you clarify the requirement mentioned in which drug courts need to be using a validated risk assessment tool?
Okay, yeah, I think, because it isn't a requirement in the application.
Will this grant cover violent offenders if applying as a VTC category B?
Yes.
Can a nonprofit entity providing services at no cost to veterans as part of the Veterans Treatment Court, and that's through an already existing MOU, can that be counted as a portion of the match for a veterans court?
Let me ask Tracy about that. Tracy.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry about that.
That's okay. Can a nonprofit entity providing services at no cost to veterans as part of their VTC be counted as a portion of the match for a veterans treatment court?
Okay, so yeah, they could do that because they would be a third party, and that would be considered, they were going to be paying that entity to provide services, then they can apply that towards soft match.
Okay, great. For co-occurring programs, does it matter which diagnosis is the primary contributor to the nexus of criminal activity?
No, it doesn't.
Let's see. If agencies will not allow employees to sign MOUs, is there another way for team members to agree to be part of the team or project?
I mean, I'm not thinking of one right now. I mean, if we do have the form, you could maybe complete the form and have them, sign it. But if they don't want to sign it, that's one of the attachments to the solicitation. So you would really need to work out what that would look like for you in terms of if they're submitting the application. If the staff doesn't want it to sign, indicate what their responsibilities would be, then that may present a challenge for the program. I guess that's how I'll answer that.
Okay. Does it make an application more appealing if the applicant does not ask for the full award amount?
No, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that we encourage applicants to request the grant maximum, as well as request funding to support the entire period of performance, which for these awards is 48 months. No, there's not a increase in your application to get awarded if you ask for $200,000. But you want to make sure that your application and what you're requesting is consistent with what you're requesting funding to do. So if you're requesting to hire a case manager and that's it, and your budget is $500,000 to fund one staff, then that would be a little bit different. But no, you're not looked upon less if you don't request the total 500,000 or the 1.5.
Okay, great. Tracy, I believe this is a question for you. Is it required to enter the in-kind match on the budget worksheet each year, or should it be listed in the budget narrative?
No, match has to be broken out by year, and then the total match, of course, would be on the summary. And of course, it's the 25% of the total amount, because that's going to come into play when we review your budget.
Okay.
So we need to see how you're going to be spending it each year.
Okay.
Yes.
There's another question for you. Do I submit the budget detail and narrative for each individual year of the 48-month grant period?
48-month grant period.
And
I'm
then
sorry, you were breaking up. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Do I submit the budget detail and narrative for each individual year of the 48 months and then a final summary of them all?
Yes. What'll happen though with your summary, that'll give you a tally that'll pull everything together by line item category and separate it out. That's the way the spreadsheet is set up. But you do need to have narrative for each line item by year.
Okay.
Yeah, and the budget, just jumping off what Tracy said, when they get a chance to look at the budget, one of the things I mentioned in one of the slides with the budget that you have to do an itemized budget for each year. And the budget form is broken down where you have a slot, PDF form, where you have a slot for each year that they can go in. So the budget form is set up that way where you do an itemized budget, like Tracy said.
Okay. This court has both a co-occurring mental health court and an adult drug court. So they're separate populations. Could they submit an application for each program under category 3?
For a co-occurring court and an adult drug court?
Correct.
Yes, they would be able to. Adult drug courts are co-occurring court, DUI courts. They're all fall underneath the quote-unquote adult drug courts as relates to our funding appropriation. You have adult drug courts, which are co-occurring courts, drawing a blank, co-occurring DUI, DWI courts, and tribal healing and wellness courts, and then you have appropriation for veteran treatment courts. But yes, they would be able to apply under category 3.
Okay. When submitting the budget, is it for the budget related to the grant request or the entire court's funding source?
The budget, when they're applying, would be for the overall, obviously the itemized each year, so it'll be what they're planning to do overall with their funding for them being awarded the grant for each year. So it would be the overall, what they're looking to do once they receive the award.
Okay. There's 2 questions related to the violent offender. So the first question is, the violent offender prohibition refers to charge and not conviction, and for past charges as well as present charges.
Yeah, the current language says charged.
Okay. Right. And then the second question related to the violent offender, because definitions of a violent offense vary from state to state, what charges fall under the violent offender language?
So what, I'm sorry, can you read that again?
Sure. The definition of violent offense varies from state to state. So is there a list of specific charges that fall under what's defined as a violent offense?
There are a particular list. You have to go read the statute. And I do know each state is differently. So and when it comes to a state looking at their own statute, we kind of allow them to move forward identifying what their statute is. But if you go to the statute we have in the solicitation and for drug courts, that's the language. I don't believe there's an indication of any specific charges, but more so, I have to again pull back up that language, but just kind of go through the language. But there isn't any particular charge indicated in that language.
Okay. And there is another question around when you mentioned courts can apply directly as long as they are an eligible entity for Category 3. The eligible entities listed are state government, city, county, tribal courts, and other. What type of agency would qualify as other?
Well, it would be other would be if you are a drug court with the county. Other, there's a solicitation there. Other would be if you're applying in partnership with the county. I might be kind of muddling this up a little bit.
We could look that up and put that in the Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think the other is referring more to others that may be applying implying on part of an eligible entity. But yeah, let's look. I want to make sure I get that particular piece right, because because really it's the ones that are indicated on there outside of the other is who can apply, who is eligible.
Great. Let's see. In Category 3, can you apply for VTC-B violent offenders, or can you apply for VTC-B under Category 2?
So applying for a VTC would be under Categories 1 and 2, and you can apply for VTC. Again, Category 1 is for a court wanting to start or launch a new VTC, and they can request Type A or Type B. And Category 2 is more of an operational VTC applying, and they would be able to apply for a Type A as well as a Type B. Category 3 is primarily for those applying for adult drug courts, but what we do allow for that, if they're applying for adult drug court and another docket, they could apply for VTC funds and apply for Type A or Type B. But if you're really looking to request funding for a VTC, you will really be focusing on Category 1 and 2.
Okay. So is there a way to see the actual hard copy formats for each of the required sections of the application? So this would include the abstract, the narrative, the budget detail, both narrative and detail worksheet, as well as the time task plan, as they will appear in Just Grants.
Well, they should appear as they are in the solicitation. I guess I'm not quite sure I understand. So if they're looking to see if those particular documents would be formatted differently in Just Grants or in grants.gov?
I think the question is there a formatted template that will appear in Just Grants, or do these documents need to be created?
Yeah, there should be a formatted template.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then when they log into Just Grants, is there a way to see those templates before they begin working on them?
I'm not sure. Again, Just Grants is a newer system. I'm not quite sure if there's a way to see them before they go into them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a list of what is accepted as match funds as treatment team members' salaries not paid by the specialty court, or does the match have to be a direct cash match?
I'll turn it over to Tracy.
No, it can be, as I stated earlier, it could be a soft match. Soft match would be from a third-party entity, or they can apply a portion of their salaries towards the match. So it could be a variety, as long as in sync with what's allowable as far as federal costs are concerned.
Okay.
So what's allowable for federal costs can also be, or it's also allowable for match.
Okay.
I think I
Yeah,
answered the question
and
correctly.
Yeah, and before we go to the next question, I just wanted to also give a tidbit, because that as it relates to, doing the narrative and, what it looks like. One of the things I highly recommend, and a lot of you probably already doing that. So when you pull up the solicitation, I would just, if you're able to convert it over into Word or what have you, go through each section of the program narrative, break it, whichever category you're applying for, and cut and paste each question out, and then allow a section for you to be able to respond to each of those questions. That way you don't miss anything. And then also what I would recommend you do with that, and keep them in that same order, because you want to make it easy as possible for whoever the peer reviewer is in terms of being able to track what the question is and how you're responding to it. And so I know a lot of you guys are probably already doing that, but that's just always helpful tip that I used to do when I used to write applications a while back, is I make sure I answer every question and I go straight in and fill it out. And if I aren't able to respond to a question, that might be where my gap is in resources. And then that's where I might need to identify where those resources are, those partners that can contribute to that gap.
That's great.
Throw that in. Yeah.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, if you go to the ndcrc.org website under the grant announcements page, we do have a template for the project narrative for each of the 4 options. So if you're applying under category 1, there's a template for you, 2, 3, and 4 as well. And so that has all of the questions that you need to address within your project narrative. So we hope that that's helpful for you. And let us know if you have questions about that, but those documents are there for you to download. Couple more questions. Who would submit for category 4 for a state?
It would be the state agency, or who had authorization to be able to submit the application would be the person who would probably submit it. So I guess you have to determine who at the state has the authority to write the application.
Okay.
Then that's who would submit it.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about why incentives aren't allowed with BJA funding?
I'll turn it over to Tracy if you want to talk about it.
As far as food and beverage are concerned, there was an issue some years ago, and where food was served at like a continental breakfast or something like that, and there was a big issue with it. So DOJ passed a regulation or executive order that food and beverages could not be funded with federal funds. Now, as far as incentives are concerned, I don't recall there being like an executive order or anything that disallowed incentives, but depending on the monetary amount, because at one time it was like $10, you could give an incentive, but now if it costs, if there's a major cost for the incentive, then no, you can't give it. But if you want to do tokens or fishbowl or something like that, then you can use award funds for that.
Okay. There's another match question, Tracy, I think for you. How would you suggest quantifying a soft match, such as team members that donate time? when the time spent is driven by variables that fluctuate?
Well, what I've asked my grantees to do is if they award funds are, say, for instance, 20% of a case coordinator time is totally being dedicated to the program. The best way to do that is to have a log sheet and just have the employee or, the staff member to sign on, date and time and all that. So that way, if we came out and did a monitoring, then we could compare to make sure that the work that was completed is proportionate to the amount that you are requesting to use towards match.
Okay. And then there's another question about the fiscal agent MOU. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails, and is there a template available?
I can't recall off the top of my head if there's a template, but they can send me an email and I can get that to them or send them an example of what one should look like. The purpose of the fiscal agent MOU is, as Greg stated earlier, is most of the time courts do not apply directly and they are applying under a city or a county, because 9 times out of 10 it's the city or county that has the DUNS number that would be registered in sam.gov. So the MOU is just showing that the court agrees with the county or the city being the fiscal agent, and the fiscal agent, the city or county, agrees to act back to the entity that is assigned to that DUNS number in sam.gov. So it's more for accountability purposes, because the court wouldn't have, an account or whatever that the funds could be pulled down into.
Okay, great. Is there, are sex offenders eligible for BJA funding?
No.
Do you have a list of qualified recommended risk assessment tools?
No, I don't have a list of that, but there probably is. Is there any information on the National Drug Court Resource Center of where they can go?
We do. So on the ndcrc.org website, we do have a list of assessment tools. And so those have been used by programs across the country. So please check that out. So this is a clarification question from a previous question. 2 separate applications from one court for 2 separate specialized docket under one category is okay. So one is an adult drug court, the other is a co-occurring court. They could both apply under category 3.
Yes. Yes. And if a court has a current BJA grant that will expire prior to them receiving a new award, and if it has the same focus, they can also receive that award too. So if their grant is getting ready to expire at the end of the fiscal year, their period of performance is over, they could apply and also receive that award. The challenge sometimes comes when that happens and an applicant look to want to do a no-cost extension, then that becomes a challenge because you can't have 2 of the same award at the same time.
Okay, great. Are nonviolent sex offenders excluded from funding by BJA?
Nonviolent sex offenders. Sex offenders would be excluded. I believe sex offenders fall underneath violent offenders. So that fits what that's part of the violent prohibition, offender prohibition. I hope I'm phrasing this question correctly. Is this grant one that can be continued after the 4 years are up? Well, one of the things I just mentioned is that at sometimes awards may have particular challenges in terms of starting up, or something happened, a hurricane or a tornado prohibits the court from being able to operate. They would need to submit a justification, if they receive award, a justification to BJA, to their state policy advisor, requesting to do what's called a no-cost extension, and then they would be able to extend it beyond the period of performance for this grant was the 48 months.
Okay. Can you give examples of recovery support services that have been funded under the grant program?
Yeah, it's transitional housing, peer recovery, peer specialists. We're not going to kind of box you into whatever services that you indicate that would be, if it falls within the peer recovery support services. So whatever you identify what your need related to a peer recovery support, you would be able to use that funding for that. But typically it's transitional housing, things like that, supporting them getting to and from treatment and things of that nature.
Okay. There's another question regarding the violent offender language. Is there an exclusion if there is any history of violent offenses, or is it only their current charge? How is this managed in relation to probation and parole violations?
So violent offender isn't necessarily related to the current offense. If they are or have been identified as a violent offender, then they would fall underneath the violent offender prohibition.
Okay. How is a pool of participants identified located for a veterans treatment court?
How is a pool of participants located?
Or identified?
Well, that would be for the veteran treatment court that will be starting to develop what their plan would be to do outreach, connect to the VA. But it's really, it wouldn't be me telling you how that court would do it. You would be indicating that within your application, how you plan on. And that has to go back around to what I mentioned in terms of capacity. Please apply to these grants, but if you're not at the current capacity to apply, work towards getting to the capacity. We have a lot of different training resources through our national drug court training technical assistance that could get you there or get you some understanding of what you may need and or helping you evaluate your state and assess where resources are, where veterans are. And you also want to make sure that if you're going to start a veteran or launch a veteran treatment court, you have eligible participants in that area. I mean, if there's only 20 veterans in that city or state, or not state, but then it may be kind of challenging to start a veteran treatment court because you wouldn't really have any source of referrals.
Okay. We have about 10 more questions. I know we're a little bit over time. So would you like to answer this in the Q&A that we can send out?
Yeah, we'll follow up, because I think we were supposed to end around 3, but we got a lot of great questions, and I wanted to make sure everybody got their questions responded to. But I do want to see if there's a way we could maybe collect these, and then we'll put out a Q&A and respond to that way. So we'll make sure we get your questions answered, or their questions answered. Great.
Well, we would like to thank everybody for joining us today. We know this is a busy time, and so we appreciate you joining us. We will make the video available to folks within probably a day or so, and we'll also put out a Q&A document. So we will have the questions that were posed here, as well as some that were emailed in. We'll provide the answers and then make that available both on the ndcrc.org website, as well as send those to you by email attachment. So again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to reading your proposals.
Let me just say one more thing. I did mention that I would provide my email address. So it is Gregory, Gregory, Torain, that's TORAIN, at usdoj.gov. So that's Gregory.Torain, TORAIN, at usdoj.gov. So, all
Great.
right, thanks, Kristen.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
All right, thanks, guys.